Welcome to Questioning Strategies. I'm Tony Szymanski, and I've developed this video to help you understand how you can improve creating questions for your students. As obvious as this quote seems, you'd be surprised how many times we just simply use the questions that come at the back of the chapter or with our textbook, and when we're finished, we get a score, but we really don't have any information about what our students are learning. So this quote helps us to remember that we have to ask the right questions. We have to be really mindful about what information we're trying to get and what we're going to do with it so we can choose the right questions. Miller, Lynn, and Gronlund offer 8 basic steps to creating good questions. But we need to start with looking at the top goal. So our goal is improved learning and instruction. And so along every step, we need to keep that in mind. The first thing we need to do is determine the purpose of the measurement. Why are we giving this test, this quiz? Why are we going to even ask these questions? What are we trying to measure? Then develop the specifications. This can go into what content you want to cover, what type and depth of learning and thinking do you want to go into. Basically, what are the specifications that are going to help you answer your question and go back to the purpose of your measurement? Then you need to select the appropriate assessment tasks. So if you want something that is going to show deep critical thinking and higher levels of thinking, you'll need to develop tasks that are providing opportunities of that. If you just simply need a quick check-in, then you'll just provide tasks that are simple and lower level thinking. Step 4 asks us to prepare the relevant assessment tasks. That's simply writing the questions, creating the test, things like that. Then we assemble it. We decide the order. How do you want to structure the test? Do you want to go from easier to harder? Do you want to stick within specific concepts that you're trying to cover? We administer the assessment, and then we appraise the assessment. This is a critical step that a lot of people miss. This is going back and looking at the performance of the students, not in how well they did on the test, but in looking at who got which questions right and which questions wrong, and what kind of wrong answers did they provide. This gives you a lot of information about the learners and the assessment. You can look at it, and if a lot of students misunderstood a question, you can put a note, so next time you can just modify that. The whole idea with creating questions is it's not a one and done. You get better with practice, but it's something that you'll need to come back and tweak for your learners and for yourself. So you want to take time on this step 7 to really appraise the assessment. Did it work like you thought it would? Did you get the information you were looking for back in step 1? And then 8, use the results. I know a lot of times we're in a hurry and we need to just put the answers in, put the scores in our grade book and move on. But to really use the results, we need to take a look at how the students did, and then how are we going to change our learning? What do we need to do? Do we need to differentiate? Is it time to move on? Is it time to regroup? We need to use these results because our end goal is to improve learning and instruction. So it's not simply enough to be done with it and move on to the next thing. We need to kind of wring out every little bit of information that we can from these results. So going back to step 1, let's start with this bottom bullet here. What specific information are you hoping to get? That answers the question of what's the purpose. We are asking our students to complete these assessments to get some kind of information. So what do we need to get? So in order to think about creating assessments, we need to think about why we're doing it so we can determine how to best design it. And so we want to create assessments that provide us with valid, reliable, and most importantly, useful information about what our kids are learning. So going back to step 2 in our basic steps, we need to develop specifications. We need to build a table that really shows us What are we trying to measure? So I propose you make a little chart. You can use Excel or even a piece of notebook paper and write a list of your instructional objectives and outline the course content. Then build a two-way chart and look and see how much you have covered in your course content of these instructional objectives. So you'll have one across the top, maybe this number 1, the instructional objectives, and then number 2 is your course content. And then you can just go back through and look at your lesson plans and determine which aspects of your course have you included more or less of different instructional objectives. Because what you need to do with this two-way chart is you want to see, okay, those things that you've spent the most time on, those are the things that you should be assessing more. And the things you haven't spent that much time on, you shouldn't really be assessing because that's something that you deemed wasn't important for teaching. And so there's probably, not going to be much to assess there. This is an example of some instructional objectives for a 7th grade class. This might go across the top of your two-way chart. And then down the left-hand side, vertically, you would list every day the lesson plans. And then you just simply put an X underneath each one of these standards or each one of these instructional objectives for the time period that you're assessing. This will give you a quick and easy visual on what it is that you're trying to teach the students. Here's an example of that table of specifications. You'll see across the top, those were our learning instructional objectives. And on the left-hand side here, you can see this is the things we were working on. We were working on a novel, some poetry, short stories, selected text. And then what I've done here along the bottom is I just simply totaled up the number of items. And then this last row is the percentage of all the items. On the right-hand side, we did the same exact thing, looking at the number of items that were covered by each one of our lesson plans, and then the percentage. So you can easily take a look and see, oh wow, this teacher spent 33% of the time looking at determining a theme or central idea. So 33% of the assessment should go along with determining a theme or central idea. And then followed by citing textual evidence, analyzing how elements of a story interact, and then finally determining the meaning of the words. We can also see that this teacher used short stories quite a bit and kind of used the other things equally. And so perhaps some selections from different short stories, along with parts of the novels and selected texts, could be used in creating the questions. So this is just a way for you to easily take a look and see where you've spent most of your time. So when you're creating an assessment, if you've spent most of your time on determining a theme or central idea, and perhaps you look at the meaning of the words is very low, you wouldn't want to create an assessment that focused more on the meaning of the words than on determining a theme or a central idea, because clearly that was more important in your teaching. This is a quick little checklist that'll help you when you're thinking about the tests and the assessments. You can take a look at these and then measure them back with your table of specifications and make sure that your things are kind of in line with what you are expecting as far as information. So this is the $100,000 question, right? What makes a good question? These are 4 really key ideas that you need to keep in mind when you're writing your own questions or even looking at those that came with your curriculum. You need, again, to keep in mind what information are you trying to get from the student's answers to determine if this question is good or not. A recommendation is to write up some of your own questions and then ask a colleague to review and give you feedback on the appropriateness. Is it at the student's level of understanding? Maybe even ask a colleague to determine what specific aspect of instruction you're trying to get at. What was the learning objective that this question is testing out? Writing good questions takes practice. And even evaluating good questions from the material provided also takes practice. If you've decided to use objective questions, multiple choice and true false, there's a few rules that make things easier on you and more clear on your students. I've listed them here. There's a few things that are pretty important. Number 3, don't test on trivia. That's important. If you're going to be asking your students to put in time and do their very best, then it is important that you respect their time and don't ask trivial things that aren't really important to the learning. Avoid using the words here in red. Those can also be tip-offs to your students that, if they see those are kind of questions that are not well written. And make sure that each statement is clearly true or clearly false. Don't ask for any kind of opinions or things that are vague. These should be just the facts and relate specifically to things that are clearly true or clearly false. Whether you're writing your own questions or evaluating something that came with your text, it's a good idea to pay close attention to the stems, the question part, and the alternatives. Each item should only stick to one idea, whether it's a multiple choice or a true-false question. The stem, the question part, should represent a sample of the targeted objective. What that means is if you are asking questions about theme, then the STEM should have a sample. It should have a section that leads the student to know you're talking about theme. And it should be based on a specific, clearly stated problem. Now, when you're thinking about alternatives, what's common is to write one clearly right answer, one clearly wrong answer, and 2 kind of throwaway distractors. Well, it might be common, but that's not best practice. If you're only going to write one clearly right answer and one clearly wrong answer, why not make it a true false? If you want to get more information, write the distractors, but write them in such a way that if a student chooses one of the distractors, that's still giving you information. So take a look at what you're writing and make sure that it's providing some very good information to you as a teacher. So when you go back and look at the results, you won't just see who got them right or wrong. For students who got them wrong, you can see if many picked something that's closely related or that shows just a slight misunderstanding versus students who have it down, totally complete mastery, or students who are struggling in a different area. It's really important that you pay attention and take some time. And again, this takes practice.
Your audience didn't show up to read your 60-page on-screen dissertation.
When you're writing your own
They're
questions,
there to see you,
keep them
to be
specific
inspired by
and
your
to the
message
point.
And witness
It's
the
really
quality of
important
your thought.
to know that you are measuring students' understanding. And if you confuse them with vocabulary words they're not used to or put a lot of text on there that they're not familiar with and they have to dig through, then you're not just measuring the student's understanding of the content, you're measuring their ability to dig through miscellaneous information, or you're measuring their ability to decode unfamiliar words. If that's your intention, that's fine, but if that's not, you're going to be muddying the results of your tests. Okay, so you've written some questions, you tested them out on a colleague or unsuspecting roommate, and you're ready to give them to your students. Your students take the test, and you get the results back. How do you know if you had a good question? Well, again, this is going to take some practice because you're building your test bank or your skills as a test writer. And so the first thing that you can do is create what's called a discrimination index. So in this case, you're measuring whether or not a question was good by learning who got it right and who got it wrong. If everyone in the class gets a question right, or if everyone in the class gets a question wrong, that's not a very good question because it's not giving you, the teacher, any information about it. So it's important that you have questions that some students got correct and some students got incorrect. So first thing to do is go back and look at your test, and if everybody got a question all right, if every single person in the class, take a look at that question. Maybe you worded it too easy. Maybe the answer was 3 questions back and they just knew to take a look at that. See why they got it right. If everyone missed a question, take a look at that question. Was the wording confusing? Did you use vocabulary that none of the students knew? Did you ask more than one question? Those are your 2 beginning tip-offs. If you have eliminated the questions that everyone got right and everyone got wrong, now you can start to calculate your discrimination index. This is the measure of the difference in the number of high-performing students, the kids who got high scores, and low-performing students. Because ideally, you want to look back at your test and you want to be able to see the questions that the struggling students got wrong and the questions that the high ability or the high achieving students got wrong. They may be 2 different sets, and they will give you more information about your questions and inform your teaching. So the next slide, we'll look at how to calculate the discrimination index. Okay, so I know this looks like a lot of work and math, which some of you may not be very excited about doing. First of all, it's not that much work. It is the first time or 2 that you do it, but then pretty soon it will become just kind of automatic. And you only have to do this maybe the first 2 or 3 times you give the test so that you can get an idea of how well your questions are working. Once you've given a test once or twice, then you'll know which questions are good and which questions you need to revise, and then you should be pretty good to go. So the first thing you do is put the kids' scores in order from high to low. Find the median of that score. That's the score that's right in the middle where half the kids are above and half the kids are below. If it's kind of you have an even number and you don't know what that number should be, just split it in half. So the kids who scored in the top half, we're going to call those the high group, and the kids who scored in the lower half, we're going to call those the low group. Now for every single question on your test, you have to look and see who got it right and who got it wrong for each group. So for example, if there's 15 kids in the high group and 12 got the question right, then our calculation is 12 divided by 15, and that's 0.8. By the way, Excel will do this really quick and easy for you. Now we're going to repeat the same thing with the low group. If there's 15 kids in the low group and 9 got that question right, it's 9 divided by 15, or 0.6. Okay, so now all we're going to do is subtract these 2. So 0.8 minus 0.6 is 0.2. So this is evidence that your item is working fairly well. That is 70%, and you can see the calculation here, of the total group is answering the item correctly. The item is doing a reasonable job of separating the higher students from the lower students. So you can be fairly confident that this item, this one single question, is doing its job. It's able to separate out the kids who know it from the kids who don't know it. If you got a 0, that means the number is not working at all and doesn't contribute at all to the showing of who's learned the material. So you should revise that question or toss it. The next thing from here is to look at those students who missed this question, and if you wrote it well, you can see where their misconceptions are, where their not understanding is. And then you can even group questions together. So if there's similar questions that they all got wrong, that will give you information about your teaching. So the whole idea here is not to make more work for you. It's actually quite the opposite. If you can get good, solid information from a few assessments and revise your teaching accordingly, that is much, much better than creating, grading, and scoring multiple assessments that are not giving you any information to change your teaching behavior and really help the kids learn. It's just kind of spinning your wheels and not giving you anything that's really going to help you. So your students are probably pretty used to answering questions and taking tests, but it's still important to understand that you're going to have verbal learners and visual learners, and you need to scaffold them to help them answer questions. The visual learners might need you to help them figure out how to take words and draw pictures that make sense for them. Similarly, the verbal students may need help organizing things and keeping their answers in a reasonable way. And so you can help them that way as well. Here's some ideas you can use when you're working with a colleague to practice your questions. I really hope you take this to heart and come up with a little PLC group that you try questions out on. If everyone tried 4 or 5 questions out on one another, pretty soon you guys will have a nice solid bank of questions that you could use. The next 3 slides offer some opportunities for group practice. It might be a good time to pause the video and get into groups, and then try to walk through the next 3 slides within your groups and compare the results you have. Remember, the whole point of working together is to help improve your performance as teachers, help your teaching to improve through writing better questions and better assessments, give you more information to ultimately help your learners learn the material. I hope you found this video helpful, and my contact information is on the last slide. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or comments you might have.
Your audience deserves to be treated like royalty. Design a presentation that meets their needs and not just yours.